Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vittorian, and this is the 25th hour helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle. Now, in this week's news for the week of February 21st to 27th, 2021. De Blasio is having a mixed week celebrating middle school reopenings, but continuing to take flack on long vaccine lines. Cuomo is still under siege for his nursing home scandal and now sexual harassment allegations, yet is carrying on like nothing went wrong. Biden visited Texas to survey their winter storm damage and is set to approve a third vaccine, then launched retaliatory strikes against Iranian targets in Syria, as well as opening new facilities to handle an overflow of unaccompanied migrant children. Now, on to the show. Things may have changed by the time you hear this, starting with de Blasio. New York City logged 717,000 overall COVID cases and a little over 29,000 deaths as numbers trend downward. The city is planning to have easily accessible at-home COVID vaccines provided by Johnson & Johnson as soon as the company begins distributing its 20 million vaccines, in an effort to reach more insular New Yorkers who aren't likely to venture out for a vaccine. COVID infections and hospitalizations have been on a steady decline, much to the relief of officials and residents alike. Health Commissioner Dave Chokshi said at-home vaccinations can begin as early as next month. In response to reports about people waiting for up to 5 hours in some cases to get vaccinated at Citi Field and Bathgate, the mayor said no one should have to wait that long and that his administration is working on addressing the issue. The long lines are in some respect a result of more vaccine supply that has come to the city, with a daily high of around 179,000 doses being administered in the state, as we point out in a bit. The City Health and Hospitals Corporation said it's doubling the number of medical workers giving vaccines at Citi Field in response to the long lines. Two sets of studies, one from Caltech and the other from Columbia University, say that a new COVID variant called B.1.526 is spreading rapidly throughout the city and can present challenges to vaccine effectiveness, although the studies aren't peer-reviewed yet. City records show that Manhattan has more vaccination sites than any of the other boroughs, presenting a challenge to de Blasio's pledge of bringing equity to neighborhoods hit hardest by the pandemic. Manhattan has 125 sites, with Brooklyn in second place with 91, while the Bronx has 69. The mayor is staying on course when it comes to putting pressure on the governor, saying that the calls for an investigation into Cuomo's alleged sexual assault of former staffer and current Manhattan Borough President candidate Lindsey Boylan should move forward.
These allegations are really disturbing. Let's be clear about that. They're really disturbing. We have to, as New Yorkers, we got to take this seriously. We need a full and independent investigation. I want to emphasize the word independent. This kind of behavior, if it's true, is unacceptable.
Profiling the mayor's race as it stands, New York Magazine's David Friedland pointed out the Zoom hell that candidates and a small circle of supporters are in, with more candidates taking part in internet forums than those who are watching. With the huge amount of Zoom forums hosted by various groups and political clubs throughout the city, the meetings go largely unnoticed, with little news to come out of them. Comptroller Scott Stringer said that he's refunding campaign contributions given by Queens trash hauler George Kalergios, who was convicted of federal bribery charges. The local Republican parties of the various boroughs have set up a showdown for their mayoral primary. Vigilante gang The Guardian Angels founder Curtis Sliwa was endorsed by the Staten Island and Brooklyn Republicans, while Fernando Mateo, the taxi and bodega advocate, was endorsed by Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. Meanwhile, Sliwa had a complaint filed against him by a Bronx lawyer to the Campaign Finance Board, saying that Sliwa is violating campaign laws by promoting his mayoral run on his own radio show, accusing Sliwa of giving an in-kind donation. In-kind donations are non-cash gifts, and they do have a limit. The CFB said they're reviewing the complaint. Former Sanitation Commissioner Catherine Garcia rolled out a police policy proposal that would make it easier for small businesses to get permits and expand outdoor seating beyond just the pandemic era. Specifically, businesses with fewer than 100 employees can apply for a permit on their phones and get a response within a month. Garcia also wants to waive fines and fees for those businesses for her first year as mayor. Andrew Yang, fresh off his bout with COVID, came to the rescue of a photographer who was at one of Yang's events at the Staten Island Ferry when someone took a pole to the photographer beating him. Yang was able to talk down the assailant, and police took him into custody. A Queens Republican district leader was arrested for his role in the Capitol insurrection. Philip Grillo was apprehended this week after investigators were able to connect Grillo's Knights of Columbus jacket, which he wore when he broke into the Capitol, with the rest of the crowd. He was released on a $100,000 bond. Public advocate Jemani Williams is going to pull Sia Weaver's nomination to the City Planning Commission after all, citing that Weaver herself requested her name to be pulled from consideration. Right-wing officials were quick to point out Weaver's progressive politics, including calling for tenant rent strikes and eviction bans. Department of Education Chancellor Richard Carranza announced he is going to resign effective in the middle of March. The New York Times reported that a reason for the resignation is disagreement with Mayor de Blasio about desegregating the city school system, with de Blasio reportedly against Carranza's policy proposals.
I know the pandemic has not been easy for you or for any New Yorker. And make no mistake, I am a New Yorker. Well, not by birth, by choice. A New Yorker who has lost A New Yorker who has lost 11 family and close childhood friends to this pandemic. And a New Yorker who, quite frankly, needs to take time to grieve. I feel that I can take that time now because of the place that we are in, and the work that we have done together.
Carranza, who hailed from the Houston and San Francisco school systems, didn't lead a very popular tenure, as he chided parents against his desegregation and testing policies. Carranza is going to be replaced with the city's first black school chancellor, Bronx Executive Superintendent Misha Ross Porter, a 20-year veteran of the city's school system. Middle school students have begun coming back to in-person classes this week, with de Blasio hopeful about the possibility of high school students returning soon as well. Close to 40,000 teachers have been vaccinated so far. Evictions in New York City dropped by more than 80% last year, according to Department of Investigation data. A total of 3,059 tenants were evicted last year, down from 17,000 evictions in 2019. The state eviction moratorium is credited with preventing the throwing out of tenants during the pandemic, and as we go over a bit later, that eviction moratorium has now expired. One unfortunate byproduct of the pandemic which continues to hit the MTA is the endangerment of a training program that gave high school grads an express track to getting a transit job. More scrutiny is being paid against the MTA because they keep threatening to or actually cutting programs and pay raises even though the agency just received $4 billion in federal aid. Yet, the MTA Inspector General Carolyn Pokorny was able to report her office was able to save the agency $22 million, recovering $2 million in lawsuits against fraudulent workers and contractors, and saving $20 million from overseeing Hurricane Sandy recovery projects. Data from the Port Authority and the MTA show that truck traffic is also coming back to pre-pandemic levels, but cars and buses are still lagging behind. The City Board of Elections has hired a new Democratic General Counsel replacing Stephen Richmond, who retired after the Department of Investigations announced a probe against him. Himali Patel has a long history of court experience and enjoys wide support across the city Democratic Party. A pilot program in East Harlem and Harlem, meant to provide more mental health services directly to residents instead of cops, gun blazing, is going to effect this spring. The program entails experts and medical technicians answering mental health 911 calls. The pilot started 3 months ago with little to no details. The Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, finally got his hands on Trump's tax documents after the Supreme Court gave a green light for the final time for prosecutors to effectuate a subpoena for Trump's tax accountants, Mazars USA. The DA also took on a Special Assistant District Attorney, Mark Pomerantz, who has experience in complex white-collar and organized crime cases, and also hired forensic accounting experts FTI Consulting to look at Trump's property deals. Another person from Trump's orbit who should be concerned about the Manhattan DA is Steve Bannon, the president's former chief strategist. Cy Vance subpoenaed Bannon's financial records as well, relating to the failed border wall scheme Bannon had with other co-conspirators, in which they allegedly lined their own pockets from donations meant to help build a southern border wall. The NYPD's chief of department, Terrence Monahan, has resigned, opting for a COVID advisory role. Monahan was apparently already looking for private sector opportunities before the mayor approached him for the new job, and he will be replaced by Chief of Detectives Rodney Harrison, who in turn will be the third black chief of department in NYPD history. The hate crimes against Asian New Yorkers continues to grab headlines, with recent attacks occurring in Flushing, Queens, and Chinatown in Manhattan, including a stabbing. The total number of hate crimes against Asians increased to 28 last year. The attackers in these cases are being apprehended, including in the stabbing just mentioned. 23-year-old Salman Muflihi was charged with attempted murder as a hate crime. The mayor signed the council bill into law that would create a committee that would issue recommendations about the future of the city jail system without Rikers being in the picture. De Blasio had a goal of closing Rikers and setting up smaller jails around the 5 boroughs so that detainees and incarcerated New Yorkers could be closer to their lawyers and families, but it hasn't panned out. The bill would also transfer responsibility over Rikers from the Corrections Department to the Citywide Administrative Services Department. Despite the orders of an oversight board, city juvenile jails continue to hold young adults in isolation up to 17 hours a day, according to the city's own emergency petition to the board, simply saying it's for emergency reasons, circumventing the watchdog set up to make sure juvenile solitary isn't happening anymore since the death of Layleen Polanco on Rikers Island in 2019. A couple of weeks ago, we covered a proposed development that would allegedly overshadow the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, giving opponents of the plan something powerful to cling on to. The developer now unveiled 2 shorter buildings that can be built in lieu of the big one, but with the caveat of little to no affordable housing. Mayor de Blasio came out against the city council proposal to simplify the urban development process, saying it's too expensive. Council Speaker Corey Johnson proposed the plan, essentially making every district undergo 3 development scenarios every decade, which Johnson says would streamline the already convoluted process and give communities more of a say, rather than wait for developers to give their own development assessments. De Blasio said that mandating districts do their own assessments could amount to a $450 million bill per decade. Also a few weeks ago was the Hunt Point labor strike led by Teamsters Local 2020 and backed by local politicians, all about the managers at the produce market giving laborers a couple of dollars in raises. But ever since the strike, the Teamsters confirmed that 26 of their workers were fired since the strike, with the total number of workers having been fired being closer to 40. A report released by the Comptroller's office showed that the city's art and recreation industry lost 66% of their employees from December 2019 to December 2020. Although the Trump organization said it was closing the ice rinks it operates after de Blasio announced an end to contracts hatched out between the city and the organization, the mayor said that the Central Park ice rink is still going to remain open. The mayor's press secretary, Bill Neidhart, said the rinks are going to remain open for the remaining time of the season, in which then the city will find someone else to operate the rinks. Moving on to the city council. A city council plan to shift the authority over accident investigations from the NYPD to the Department of Transportation was slammed by both agencies. At a virtual hearing over the bill, DOT First Deputy Commissioner Margaret Forgione said that the DOT doesn't have the expertise to take over accident investigations and could lead to fewer prosecutions over reckless drivers and vehicular manslaughter. NYPD Legislative Affairs head Oleg Chernovsky said police officers investigating crashes should be under the direction of the NYPD, not a different agency. Co-sponsor of the bill, Councilman Brad Lander, said that the NYPD's collision investigation squad hasn't prosecuted as many cases as it should, having only taken up 349 cases out of 10,000 crashes in 2019. Additionally, the mayor did say that his administration is going to fund a program born out of city council legislation from Councilman Brad Lander, who's now running for comptroller, that mandates reckless drivers to take safety courses. Reuben Wills is eyeing a comeback into the city council after serving 2 years in prison for fraud and grand larceny, and after an appeals court overturned his original convictions. Wills would run against Councilwoman Adrienne Adams, who is currently running in the primary unopposed. Attorney General Letitia James hasn't said yet whether her office is going to retry Wills' case. Manhattan City Councilwoman Carlina Rivera, who's seen as a likely new speaker of the city's legislative chamber, endorsed 13 women for city council this week, trying to shore up support amongst a future class of female city councilwomen. Two parents of those who were killed after police arrived as they were undergoing mental health episodes say they weren't allowed to testify at council hearings about setting up an Office of Community Mental Health and a city mental health emergency response protocol. The parents of Mohammed Ba and Sahid Vassell say they were shut out of testifying at the hearing because they actually don't support the proposed council reforms, saying it's because the proposals don't keep police out of mental health encounters altogether. The City Council District 31 special election to replace now Queensborough President Donovan Richards is going to finally be the city's first test of the ranked choice voting system put in place, as no clear frontrunner has emerged after vote tallies have been counted. The City Board of Elections is going to wait to collect more absentee ballots and then calculate the winner of the election, with the results expected sometime next month. The way ranked choice voting works is that if there's nobody who receives more than 50% of the vote, the last place choice of an individual voter is then cut out, and the votes for that last place candidate get applied to the voter's second choice, until someone eventually hits more than 50%. Moving on to Cuomo. New York State has logged 1.63 million COVID cases and almost 47,000 deaths in total as numbers decline. As we mentioned earlier, the state has been receiving more doses of the COVID vaccines, with a daily high of 179,000 doses being administered and 2.6 million New Yorkers having gotten at least one shot, according to the governor. Cuomo dodged questions this week about whether he received or responded to any federal subpoenas about the nursing home death data. Apart from facing calls from censure to impeachment, Cuomo now faced renewed accusations of sexual assault by a former staffer, Lindsey Boylan, who is now running for Manhattan Borough President. Boylan hinted at accusations months before, but said she wasn't going to talk to the press about it. But ever since Assemblyman Ron Kim said people have to stand up to Cuomo's bullying, she felt compelled to detail the allegations. Kim himself is now calling for Cuomo's impeachment. Boylan wrote in an essay on Medium that Cuomo once asked her to play strip poker while on a flight back from state business, and that Cuomo kissed her on the lips once after she finished giving him a briefing. Four staffers released a statement denying Cuomo ever asked Boylan to play strip poker on the flight in question, although missing a detail that Boylan wasn't limiting who was there on the flight with her. Another Cuomo ally, Stephen Cohen, defended Cuomo by saying the governor is someone who demands excellence, and Cohen has never seen anything close to the accusations leveled against the governor. Attorney General Letitia James is reportedly considering launching an investigation into the matter. Two of New York's female Republican Congress members, Nicole Malliotakis and Elise Stefanik, called on Cuomo to resign over the sexual assault allegations, with Stefanik particularly calling Cuomo a, quote, criminal sexual predator. It should be noted that neither of the Congress members ever called on former President Trump to resign after around 24 credible sexual assault allegations. News then broke on Saturday that another sexual harassment victim stepped forward. 25-year-old former aide Charlotte Bennett said that Cuomo was asking her questions about her sex life when they were alone, particularly if she ever had sex with older men. Bannon was working as an executive assistant at the time, and she disclosed the conversation to Cuomo's chief of staff, as well as gave a statement to the special counsel to the governor, Judith Mogul. Bennett was transferred afterward to a health policy advisor job. The governor responded to the allegations in a statement saying Bennett has every right to speak out and that he tried to be supportive and helpful in light of Bennett telling him that she's a sexual assault survivor. Didn't deny he asked her personal questions and that he was trying to be a mentor to her. He called on an independent investigation to look into Bennett's accusations and said he wouldn't comment any further until the review was done. The problem is that Cuomo chose someone to lead his own review. An ex-federal judge, Beth Garvey. Democrats like mayoral candidate Maya Wiley reacted to the news, saying that a truly independent probe has to be conducted and not by someone Cuomo chose, with others like State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins saying Attorney General Letitia James should take up the issue, as past attorney generals have done so in the past. Renewed scrutiny has been placed on when Cuomo gave nursing homes legal immunity from pandemic-related actions, with reporting showing that nursing home groups and lobbyists donated to Cuomo's campaign account. The notorious South African variant of COVID is in town, located in Nassau County, said Governor Cuomo. It marks the first time the variant had been found in New York. The Nassau County Executive Laurie Curran said the infected person lives in Glen Head. The variant reportedly is more infectious, and it isn't clear whether the vaccines out in the market are totally effective against it. A Marist poll revealed that Cuomo might face serious political repercussions for his nursing home death data cover-up, with 60% of those surveyed saying Cuomo did something unethical or illegal, with 49% approve of the governor, down from 72% in July, and that only 36% believe Cuomo deserves re-election. Take that with a grain of salt, because Marist had harsh numbers on Cuomo before, only to see him coast past the primary and general election victory. Another survey, this time released by Morning Consult, showed that 57% of New Yorkers approve of Cuomo's job performance, but down from 63% in late January. In the middle of Attorney General nominee Merrick Garland's nomination hearing, which we go into a bit more later, Garland said in response to a question by Texas Senator Ted Cruz that he's open to evidence of fraud in the Cuomo nursing home fiasco.
Will you commit to investigating the extent to which the government of New York broke laws or covered up their policies concerning COVID-positive patients in nursing homes?
With all of these investigations, the Justice Department is open to evidence of fraud, false statements, violations of the law. They normally begin in the appropriate way in the relevant U.S. Attorney's Office. And that is the way that something like this, without commenting on this in particular, because I don't know the facts.
But in this instance, the acting U.S. attorney is the mother-in-law of the senior official in the Cuomo administration that admitted to the cover-up. Will you at least commit to not having the investigation done by a person with a conflict of interest?
Of course. I don't know any of the facts, but I can guarantee you that somebody with a conflict of interest will not be the person running an investigation of any kind.
Thank you.
Cuomo is carrying on as normal, however, continuing to give press briefings about the state's progress in combating the pandemic. Most recently, the governor's administration castigated Mount Sinai Hospital for canceling COVID vaccinations, with Health Commissioner Howard Zucker saying it's because the hospital is letting people sign up for appointments before adequate supply can be guaranteed. Zucker also defended the governor's nursing home policies despite the scandal erupting in the administration in a recent hearing that was long looked forward to by state lawmakers. The governor also announced that nursing home visits can resume, which started this past Friday. In one of his press briefings near the end of the week, the governor expanded vaccine eligibility to include hotel workers, saying they face a lot of health risks as frontline workers. Additionally, the state is planning policies that can help bring people to the vaccines, such as transportation for older New Yorkers, and expand the number of vaccination sites. The Gotham Gazette released an investigation that looked into inpatient psychiatric centers and how they fared during the pandemic, reporting that a fifth of those patients have gotten COVID and 58 out of the 8,200 have died, according to data given by the State Office of Mental Health. The 60-day stay on evictions that was extended in the new year has expired, with 200 evictions alone having been scheduled at the Albany City Court. Tenants can still fill out a hardship form to delay any evictions until May 1st. So far, almost 7,000 New Yorkers filed hardship forms with the courts, with most to fend off filed evictions and a smaller share to prevent filings. Despite an executive order signed by Cuomo 5 years ago giving the state attorney general the jurisdiction to investigate police misconduct, no convictions have been born out of the 43 investigations launched against police throughout the state, although there have been 2 indictments. The special unit is limited in scope, only being allowed to pursue cases where the result was an unarmed person dying. Although there haven't been any convictions, the attorney general's office said that the fact that there are investigations should bolster trust that the system is attempting to right a wrong. A New York grand jury declined to charge the Rochester police officers responsible for the death of Daniel Prude. The announcement about the grand jury decision was made by Attorney General Letitia James, expressing sympathy with those who would decry the grand jury decision.
I know that the Prude family will rightfully be disappointed by this outcome, but ultimately we have to respect the decision. The system too often allows officers to use deadly force unnecessarily and without consequence.
Police enjoy very permissive use of force laws, making it very difficult to charge an individual officer with a crime. Daniel Prude's brother had called the police when Daniel ran out of the house with a mental health episode, with Daniel only being met with cops putting a spit bag over Daniel's head while he was handcuffed and apprehended on the ground, causing him to asphyxiate. GQ profiled the mayor of Ithaca, Svante Myrick's attempts on reforming the police structure in the upstate New York town. Myrick abolished the police department, replacing it with a new city agency and outsourcing mental health calls to a different dispatch center. A week after a grand jury voted not to indict a couple of Buffalo police officers that shoved 75-year-old Martin Gugino to the ground at a police brutality protest, causing him to bleed from the ear and fracture his skull, Gugino sued the officers, the city of Buffalo, and Mayor Byron Brown, according to court documents. Gugino's lawyers are asking for a court trial amidst accusations the city of Buffalo violated his constitutional rights. A year after the plastic bag ban went into effect, there's still an issue. The state hasn't issued any fines, but has given 42 warnings against stores that kept giving out plastic bags. The governor appointed one of his allies to serve as the temporary chair of the Public Service Commission. John Howard, a 4-decade government veteran, was named interim chairman of the agency that, among other things, approves electricity rates for the state, replacing John Rhodes, whose term as chair expired. Moving on to Albany and starting in the Assembly. The Assembly finally released its list of nursing home accountability measures after vowing to do so since the Senate passed their own nursing home bills. The Assembly bills seek to tighten restrictions on nursing homes, putting a hold on new private nursing homes, and expanding capacity at existing ones. The measures would also issue guidance on visitation, infection protocols, and reforming the immunity laws that applied to nursing homes at the outset of the pandemic. In the Senate, apart from the federal investigation into Cuomo about his administration hiding nursing home death data, legislators like State Senator Leroy Comrie are calling for a state investigation into the situation, starting with holding hearings on the matter. The state Senate passed a series of bills as well that would reform the nursing home industry on Monday, which would make nursing homes more accountable, give families easier access to their sick relatives, and expand the nursing home resident advocate. Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie said that the Assembly is going to take up its own reform bills. The Senate also approved a bill that would make the health department disclose their plans to equitably distribute the vaccine so that minorities don't get left behind. A bill sponsored by State Senator Zellner Myrie proposes a clean slate for prisoners that serve their time, which includes sealing and expunging their criminal records. In order to accomplish that, the former inmate would have to wait a certain amount of years depending on their conviction, which would help former inmates with getting jobs and housing instead of having their record follow them through life. The Senate also passed a bill that would allow parolees the right to vote, 3 years after Cuomo signed an executive order about the same thing. A similar bill on the Assembly side has yet to come out of committee. Moving on to the state judiciary. Rochester Judge Thomas Leone refused to grant Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren's request to dismiss her campaign finance case against her in a hearing earlier this week. Warren and 2 co-defendants are being accused of using a political action committee to boost Warren's campaign funds. The judge did, however, order prosecutors to provide more specific information about the criminal allegations against the Rochester mayor. A state Supreme Court judge ruled in favor of certifying a class of 500,000 disabled New York City residents that are suing the MTA for lack of accessibility. The Center for Independence of the Disabled New York is one of the groups acting as plaintiff in the case and is accusing the MTA of violating the Americans with Disabilities Act and the New York City Human Rights Law by not having all 472 train stations be accessible. Moving on to Biden. An FDA advisory panel unanimously voted to recommend the approval of the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine for emergency use, with the agency quickly following through and approving it. After facing a brief hiccup due to the winter storms, vaccine distribution was back on track by the middle of the week. Biden announced on Monday that there will be tweaks to the Paycheck Protection Program, which gives loans to support businesses during the pandemic to make up for unemployment and revenue losses, in order to prioritize small businesses. Only businesses with fewer than 20 employees are allowed to apply for the program over 2 weeks, which began this past Wednesday. Dr. Anthony Fauci said that even though most Americans are going to be vaccinated by the end of this year, COVID can still have a chance to regain its virality if Americans don't stop masking up into the new year. The president marked the solemn occasion of the country passing 500,000 deaths with a moment of silence on the White House lawn.
The people we lost were extraordinary. They spanned generations. But just like that, so many of them took their final breath alone in America.
Pfizer and Moderna pledged to give a massive boost in the national vaccine supply, projecting a 140 million vaccine increase over the next 5 weeks. Biden is enjoying broad support for his COVID work so far, with a Gallup poll showing 67% of Americans approving of the president's handling of the pandemic, with 56% approving of his performance overall. The president also marked the occasion of 50 million vaccine doses being administered in his first 5 weeks in office, halfway to his 100 million dosage goal in his first 100 days.
The more people get vaccinated, the faster we're going to beat this pandemic. That's why one of my first goals in office, when I was just before I was sworn in, I indicated that my goal was to get 100 million COVID vaccine shots in people's arms in my first 100 days as president. At first, critics said that goal was too ambitious. No one could do that. Then they said it was too small. That the bottom line, though, is that America will be the first country, perhaps the only one, to get that done.
Biden made clear that Americans should still be on the lookout to make sure COVID outbreaks don't rear their heads. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen led Bitcoin to slide earlier in the week when she said the cryptocurrency was inefficient, highly speculative, and that it's a conduit for illegal activity. Bitcoin traders were worried about increased regulation on cryptocurrencies. The Labor Department reported that household income increased by 10% and spending grew by 2.4%. Unemployment claims decreased by 111,000 to 730,000 claims, the biggest drop in claims since before last summer, but it's still a high number. Shortly after approving a federal disaster declaration to give Texas and other states access to federal funds following a winter storm that cut power to millions of Texans, Biden and his wife Jill traveled to Houston on Friday to survey the damage wrought by the storm and assess what support people needed. The president thanked emergency workers and volunteered at a food bank. The president also visited the home of the aging and now ailing former senator and presidential candidate Republican Bob Dole. Dole was recently diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Biden and Dole worked together in the Senate for years and, despite being members of opposite sides of the aisle, held a good relationship. The Federal Aviation Administration demanded an emergency inspection of certain Boeing 777 airplanes after a United Airlines plane's engine exploded and ripped up in midair, causing pieces of the engine to fall over residential neighborhoods below. The flight landed safely with no injuries. United said in a statement that it was proactively grounding planes with the exact type of engine that was afflicted. After USPS Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, a Trump administration holdover, testified at a House oversight hearing on Wednesday that his changes to the postal system slowing down the mail and increasing the costs of it are justified, and that lawmakers should get used to his presence, Biden nominated 3 Democrats to the USPS Board of Governors, which has the power to fire DeJoy. DeJoy may have felt guaranteed in his job due to the vacancies in the board, but if the 3 nominees are confirmed, DeJoy might be on the chopping block sooner than he expected. Biden's pick to become a second-time Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, was reported to have more than $2 million giving speeches and consulting about the pandemic for Carnival Cruises and Airbnb, according to disclosures filed by Murthy. Another Biden appointee, Dr. Eric Lander, can't work as the government's top scientist until he divests up to $1 million in stock owned in the company BioNTech, which partners with Pfizer to develop their vaccine. Shortly following last week's commemoration of the anniversary of the Parkland High School shooting, Biden's administration is reportedly considering regulating ghost guns, which are guns made from 3D printed parts that aren't found through metal detectors, as well as other executive actions such as closing the Charleston loophole, which would keep guns away from those judicially decreed as a danger to themselves or others. After announcing his new immigration reform proposal, the Biden administration also recently opened up a migrant facility for children ages 13 to 17 that was previously used under Trump but then closed. The White House said that it needed to reopen the facility that can hold up to 700 migrant children because its existing facilities had to cut their capacities by half because of the pandemic. A surge at the border has also caused record apprehensions of unaccompanied migrant children, with a projected 9,000 kids, 2,200 weekly, being in federal custody by the end of the month. 105 migrant children who were separated from their parents and haven't been able to be reunited with them because the Trump administration deported the parents might finally see their families again after lawyers tasked by the courts to reunite families were able to do so. 506 children haven't been reunited with their parents yet. 27 migrants from Mexico's border camp at Matamoros was taken in by the U.S., becoming the first group of asylees who benefit from the rescission of the Remain in Mexico policy put in place by Trump, which required asylum applicants to stay in Mexico as their cases slowly progressed. The NASA rover Perseverance, which is exploring for signs of ancient life on Mars, who thought we'd say that, then again it's 2021, has already uploaded the first sounds ever heard of what it sounds like on Mars. Take a listen. The Justice Department released a statement that announced the arrest of Emma Coronel Aispuro, the wife of El Chapo Guzman, Mexico's former most dangerous drug cartel leader since his own arrest in 2016. Aispuro was charged with drug trafficking charges, specifically conspiring to send cocaine, meth, heroin, and marijuana into the U.S. The Chinese former minister Wang Yi said that the U.S. must end the trade war that was started under former President Trump in order to begin repairing relations between the two superpowers. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, said tariffs put in place by the last administration are going to stay in place pending a review. Trump blamed China for the U.S.'s severe loss in manufacturing jobs, correctly pointing out that the country steals American intellectual property, but then put in place tariffs, which are taxes on imports or exports, which American farmers largely took the hit for, necessitating a bailout of the farming industry. things won't be so easy with China either way, since a lot of European countries have taken the U.S.'s lead and placed financial obstacles in China's path, including canceling contracts and public bids for Chinese companies. Following the Biden administration's announcement that they are ready to meet Iran at the negotiating table regarding Iran's nuclear program, Iran said it's open to having talks with Biden's people, but are still limiting access to their nuclear sites from the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, who are supposed to be allowed on those sites as part of the nuclear agreement struck between Iran and other countries. The president authorized airstrikes in retaliation this week against buildings that are used by Iranian proxy militias in Syria, which were in turn blamed for targeting U.S. troops and contractors a couple of weeks before. Members of Congress called out Biden for the airstrikes, seeking a more assertive role in the legislative branch. The White House released more information meant to assuage lawmakers that were upset about the lack of permission from Congress to launch the strikes by divulging that key members of House and Senate committees dealing with foreign policy and intelligence were briefed before the strikes occurred and are continuing to be briefed after. Answering in response to a journalist's questions about what kind of message Iran would get from the strikes, Biden said that it means Iran better be careful and that it's a warning to expect consequences for supporting militia groups going after American troops. Officials familiar with the matter said that the White House is preparing to sanction Russia for various actions taken by the country, including the SolarWinds hack that breached numerous federal agencies and Fortune 500 companies through a backdoor built into a software utilized by those groups, as well as the attempted murder and poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Biden held the first bilateral meeting of his presidency with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this week. A plan was announced wherein the two countries will work on combating climate change, the pandemic, among other things. The trial of a U.S. citizen for terrorism is set to begin in Venezuela. Matthew Heath was arrested in September under charges of spying and arms trafficking along with the National Guard Sergeant Major Darwin Urdaneta, and were accused of trying to launch a coup against Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president. The State Department condemned the trial and called Maduro a dictator. President Biden spoke on the phone with Saudi Arabian King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, telling him in advance of a U.S. intelligence report that concluded the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS for short, ordered the killing of acclaimed journalist and Saudi critic Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi embassy in Turkey in 2018. The intelligence report was declassified and released a few days later after a year-long delay of it being hidden by the Trump administration, which enjoyed a more positive rapport with the Saudi kingdom. Saudi Arabia continues to claim that it brought the true killers to justice, but the trials of the accused were held in private. An internal U.S. government report obtained by the New York Times accuses the Ethiopian government of committing an ethnic cleansing campaign in the embattled Tigray region. In response to rebel political opposition, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent fighters into the region, which amounted to an extermination campaign of the Tigray people, including help from the bordering African country of Eritrea. Secretary of State Blinken has talked to Prime Minister Ahmed earlier this month to allow humanitarian aid into the region, but the Biden administration has been careful to criticize Ethiopia for its war tactics. Ahmed said it gives unfettered access to humanitarian groups, but the UN said only 20% of the region can be reached because of government restrictions. Trump is getting ready for his first post-presidential public appearance, scheduled to appear at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, as of the time of this recording. According to a couple of sources familiar with his plans, Trump is set to speak about how he's the presumptive nominee for the 2024 presidential election. A Suffolk University USA Today poll showed that 59% of Trump supporters want Trump to run for president again, 76% would want Trump to get the nomination, and 85% would vote for him in a general election. 46% say they would abandon the GOP and join any party Trump makes, and 58% believe Antifa was behind the Capitol insurrection. BBC reported about how Trump offered North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un a ride on Air Force One at the height of their bromance. The top Asia expert who sat on Trump's National Security Council told the BBC that Trump offered Kim a ride home after reports of the North Korean dictator taking a train for hours to Vietnam for the peace summit at the time. Meanwhile, President Biden has rescinded the anarchist jurisdiction executive order that Trump put in place during his time, labeling cities that were the sites of Black Lives Matter protests as anarchist jurisdictions and pulling their federal funding. Moving on to Congress and starting in the House. The House COVID relief bill passed in the early hours of Saturday this week with the thinnest of margins. No Republicans voted for the COVID bill despite having voted for similar measures when they were in power. Despite the Senate parliamentarian ruling that the minimum wage measure cannot be in the Senate COVID relief bill, as we go over in a bit, the House bill decided to leave in the minimum wage increase, with Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying that one way or another the $15 minimum wage increase will be addressed, and if the House is to take the measure out of the bill if the Senate passes a relief measure without the wage component, they will.
Relief, let's say the parliamentarian does allow the minimum wage. What's your strategy to get it done? Isn't it going to be an uphill climb with Manchin, Sinema, others against it? Is there what's the path forward on minimum wage?
You know what, you're going to have to go ask that question on the Senate side. But we are very, very pleased with the case that has been made. And we will pass a minimum wage bill. We must pass a minimum wage bill.
Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said that the bill is too expensive and at the same time doesn't deliver adequate relief to families. The House also passed the Equality Act, a landmark piece of legislation meant to level the civil rights playing field for LGBTQ Americans. The House bill comes on the heels of the Supreme Court ruling in Bostock, which legalized discrimination based on sex or gender orientation. The Equality Act goes beyond Bostock by not just applying anti-discrimination laws to the workplace, but also to any federally funded program in places of public accommodations like stores and stadiums. Republicans oppose the Equality Act because of fears that it'll clamp down on religious freedom. Freshman Republican representative from North Carolina, Madison Cawthorn, is the subject of a BuzzFeed investigation detailing accusations of sexual harassment and campus misconduct, according to 36 people who were interviewed. Cawthorn's office responded to the investigation, with the congressman saying he never did anything sexually inappropriate in his life. Moving on to the Senate. The Senate Rules and Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committees held a joint hearing to investigate the delayed law enforcement response to the Capitol insurrection on January 6th, hearing from the current and former chiefs of the Capitol Police and the former House and Senate sergeants at arms. What was revealed was their testimonies was conflicting depending on who was testifying, with the former chief, Stephen Sund, and former House Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, pointing fingers at one another about whether there was in fact a delayed response, and whether the Capitol Police even received a warning from the FBI saying Trump supporters were going to, quote, wage war on the Capitol. Senator Ron Johnson in particular made heads turn when he said that the rioters were actually fake Trump supporters, furthering a lie that members of Antifa stormed the Capitol. The acting chief of the Capitol Police, Yogananda Pittman, testified to the joint committee that extremist right-wing groups want to actually stage an attack during Biden's first address to Congress, which doesn't have a date. Meanwhile, the FBI said that it's zeroing in on a suspect who caused the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who can be seen on video being beaten with a fire extinguisher and pepper sprayed. Officials initially said Sicknick died from blunt force trauma, but said there's no evidence that's what he actually died from, and are now waiting for a toxicology report to confirm Sicknick inhaled an irritant while fending off the insurrection. As we mentioned before, the Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough ruled against allowing the minimum wage increase of $15 into the Senate COVID relief bill. Constitutionally, the House has to start any legislation that deals with how the government spends money, but there's an exception that lets the Senate start bills like this through a procedure called budget reconciliation. And yet there's an exception to an exception called the Byrd Rule, named after a senator that isn't around anymore. The Byrd Rule says anything in a budget reconciliation bill has to actually do with the government budget and can't just be a random policy. In her ruling, McDonough said the $15 increased federal minimum wage doesn't fit the rule, with eyes on senators about whether they'll take the measure out of the bill now or try to overrule her through a simple majority vote. Republicans, meanwhile, introduced a different minimum wage policy proposal in the Senate, spearheaded by Utah Senator Mitt Romney and Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. The proposal is to increase the federal minimum wage, currently at $7.25 to $10 in phases until 2025, but with the trade-off being that businesses guarantee usage of the E-Verify system meant to prevent hiring of undocumented immigrants. Democrats balked at the proposal, pointing to Cotton's own state of Arkansas having a higher minimum wage than the plan he put forward. Biden's pick for Attorney General Merrick Garland finally faced the Senate Judiciary Committee in a hearing this week. Garland was a judge on the D.C. Circuit before being picked by Obama to replace the late Justice Scalia, but was denied a hearing by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell at the time for almost a full year. In his hearing, Garland promised to prioritize investigations into the origins of the Capitol insurrection incited by President Trump, and also said that he sees no reason why he should get rid of any investigations started under Trump that are looking into the origins of the Russia probe. One thing I'd issue right away before the House convenes its commission to investigate the Capitol insurrection is about how one member of the right-wing extremist group, the Oath Keepers, apparently worked together with the Secret Service to provide security for the rally former President Trump spoke at before his supporters stormed the Capitol building. Biden is passing his first month in office with less than half of his cabinet confirmed, owing in part to Trump's impeachment trial and the need for Congress to take up COVID relief. Things got worse for Biden's pick for Office of Management and Budget Director, Neera Tanden. After moderate Democrat Joe Manchin announced he wasn't going to vote for Tanden due to her past of tweeting against Republicans and Democrats, attention turned to see whether any Republican would support her nomination, especially since Biden said he wasn't going to pull her nomination. Then, like dominoes, Susan Collins and Mitt Romney announced their opposition to Tanden, which made her appointment very unlikely. Bernie Sanders, who chairs a committee that would have given Tanden a hearing, delayed her nomination hearing as the Biden administration figures out what to do next with Tanden's appointment. And then there's Biden's pick for Health and Human Services, California Attorney General Javier Becerra. Becerra is no fan of Republicans who see him as a boogeyman for suing the Trump administration for its efforts to kill or hamper Obamacare. Republicans officially say that Becerra isn't qualified for the top post at HHS because he's not a doctor or other medical professional, but neither was Alex Azar, Trump's HHS secretary, who's in fact a pharmaceutical executive. Biden's nominee for Department of Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland, is also facing a rocky path to her approval, with Republicans already up in arms about Haaland's opposition to oil and gas drilling on federal lands and advocacy for for Native American tribal lands. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin may have saved Haaland's nomination after he announced his support for her nomination in the middle of the week. Democrats are accusing Republicans and Manchin of a double standard, having approved politically troublesome Trump appointees despite their partisan social media posts, but are now pointing to those as excuses not to confirm nominees like Haaland. If confirmed, Haaland would become the first Native American Interior Secretary. One nominee who was just appointed without much attention paid to him is former Iowa Governor Tom Vilsack to the post of Agriculture Secretary for the second time. Vilsack was in charge of agriculture under Obama. One surprising vote against Vilsack was Bernie Sanders, who said that the agriculture seat needed someone more assertive. Linda Thomas Greenfield was confirmed by the whole Senate for the post of UN ambassador, 78-20. In a speech after presenting her credentials to the UN, she had said that U.S. diplomacy is back and that she intends to hit the ground running as the U.S. takes control of being the chair of the UN Security Council. In her hearing, Thomas Greenfield identified China as being the biggest obstacle to the U.S. on the world stage. U.S. diplomat William Burns is also expected to skate through his confirmation vote out of committee this week for the post of CIA director. At his hearing, Burns had received a warm bipartisan welcome from senators and had warned that China is the U.S.'s greatest geopolitical threat. Former Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm won her Senate approval for Energy Secretary this week, 64-35. Her first interview after taking office had her addressing the Texas power outages last week and stressing the need to explore renewable energy sources. Even though he's the new Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer has to work for his state, New York. Schumer said that he's still fighting to include a measure in the COVID relief bill that would give failing New York restaurants $25 billion, a very delayed response to preventing closures in the state. After being mocked for trying to take a vacation while his state was freezing, Ted Cruz is now being mocked for getting to work right away, helping people load bottles into their cars as soon as he got back. Even though Cruz apologized and said how much of a mistake it was for him to leave, he's still getting ripped by others, including fellow Republicans. Cruz gave a speech at CPAC making fun of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she said her life was in danger during the Capitol insurrection. Plenty of Congress members are missing out on votes in D.C., claiming public health concerns due to the pandemic, but are slated to appear at the conservative convention and have so far already forgiven Trump for being responsible for the Capitol insurrection, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who, despite slamming Trump in his speech after McConnell acquitted the former president in Trump's impeachment trial, said that he would support Trump if he won the 24th Republican nomination for president. Other lawmakers who stood by their vote to impeach Trump continued to kick him down, though, like Representative Liz Cheney, who undercut House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy at a press conference recently by saying that she doesn't think Trump should speak at CPAC because she's been clear that she doesn't think the former president has a role leading the future of the Republican Party. We reported last week that former Georgia Secretary David Perdue was potentially thinking about running for a Georgia Senate seat again, this time against the Reverend Raphael Warnock, as evidenced through his filed paperwork. But it turns out that Perdue isn't going to run after all. Perdue said it was a personal decision. Moving on to the federal judiciary. The Supreme Court stepped up to the plate this week, making decisions in cases regarding Trump's tax returns and election fraud. First, the court refused a request by Trump's attorneys to stop the Manhattan DA Cy Vance from subpoenaing Trump's returns in a fraud case. The case began looking into hush money payments by Trump through his former attorney and fixer Michael Cohen to porn stars Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal to keep their mouths shut about their affairs with him, but then warped into an investigation of fraud relating to Trump's company overvaluing its assets in order to get loans to stay afloat. At first, the court said the DA's subpoenas were lawful, but then Trump said the subpoenas were due to political animus. The court's unsigned order gave no opinion. The court refused to get itself involved in a challenge to the Pennsylvania presidential election results brought by Republicans who claimed an extension of a deadline for mail-in ballots was unlawful even though the measure was passed by the state legislature. However, the court is set to decide a case about Republican-supported voting restrictions in Arizona that made it a crime to give another person's early ballot to election officials, put in place under the guise of combating election fraud that was never proven by Republicans supporting Trump's lies. The Supreme Court released another order this week dealing with California's COVID bans on indoor houses of worship, blocking restrictions on gatherings in churches in Santa Clara County, despite bans being lifted next week as a result of a prior Supreme Court ruling. The court also heard oral arguments in a case dealing with how much leeway police get entering someone's home while in hot pursuit of a suspect violating minor offenses. The case revolves around Arthur Lang, who was being asked to pull over by a police officer, but who Lang says he didn't notice. And then when Lang pulled into his parking garage, the officer stuck his foot underneath the garage door, preventing it from closing, entered the garage, and gave Lang a breathalyzer test. Lang claims that the police illegally entered his garage without a warrant, and that the breathalyzer results were illegally obtained. Eastern District of Texas Judge John Barker has ruled that the federal eviction moratorium put in place by the CDC during the Trump administration that Biden intends to extend is unconstitutional. Although Judge Barker didn't issue a preliminary injunction, he said he hopes the CDC withdraws the moratorium, saying that because the federal government never actually took action over interstate commerce during past pandemics, it doesn't mean that the federal government can reserve that power. The Biden administration hasn't said what it plans to do in response to the court ruling. The voting software company Dominion, which was subject to conspiracy theories by former President Trump and his associates Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and the OAN and Newsmax news channels, added someone else to their list of people being sued for defamation. The aforementioned parties are facing lawsuits to the tune of billions of dollars in damages, and now MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell is facing a $1.3 billion lawsuit, since Lindell did what the others did in pursuing fake conspiracies that the company rigged last year's elections for Biden. In related news, Giuliani has been trying to dodge process servers tasked with serving Dominion's legal papers to him, ignoring requests to accept her service by email. Giuliani was successfully served on February 10th. District Judge Joan Azrick of the Eastern District of New York, who presided over a criminal case against the former Suffolk County, Long Island DA Thomas Spota, said she's unsealing records that were kept private during the trial. Spota was convicted in December 2019 of helping cover up the beating of a handcuffed prisoner at a police precinct, eventually going to jail for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, witness tampering, and violating civil rights. Spota hasn't been sentenced yet. The Western District Judge Lawrence Villardo ordered an ICE detention facility in Batavia, New York, to come up with a vaccination plan for its detainees as a COVID outbreak erupted there. 41 people have gotten sick with COVID out of the 260 possible spots that can be held in the facility. U.S. attorneys were arguing that COVID prevention protocols in place were already effective. A panel of judges from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that the Seneca Nation of Native Americans has to pay $435 million in casino revenue to New York State as a result of an agreement reached in 2013. Seneca Nation spokesman Phil Panteon said that the tribe is reviewing their legal options. And finally, in national news, the U.S. has 28.5 million logged COVID cases and now 510,000 deaths. The U.S. has reached the grim milestone of surpassing 500,000 deaths from COVID. It's the highest death toll from the virus anywhere in the world, although the U.S. has 5% of the world's population. One issue with the vaccine distribution is what to do when there's potential to waste vaccines that people aren't getting. Pharmacists are encouraging those administering vaccines to combine vials together to create one full dose instead of letting vials with some vaccine doses go to waste. But until the FDA approves the practice, it won't be a widespread move. Moderna said it's beginning trials of a new COVID vaccine in order to get ahead of the South African variant. If the pilot is successful, the data would still need to be examined and the new vaccine would have to be approved by the FDA. Pfizer also announced shortly afterwards in the week that it's also going to study making a booster shot to supplement its 2-dose regimen. Although most of the state has recovered its power capacity following the failure of Texas's power grid to prepare and adequately manage the winter storm, millions in the state are still waking up without safe drinking water, with counties receiving a boiling notice to make sure they're not drinking tainted water. Thousands of residents are also receiving bills in the mail from their power providers to the tunes of tens of thousands of dollars. One customer got a $16,000 bill with the architects of the state's power grid defending the free market system in place. 4 members of the state's energy board resigned, underscoring the major embarrassment and political attention paid to the group overseeing the state's electric grid. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed legislation into law that eliminated cash bail in the state, reforming the process by which those detained in prison can be let out. Advocates say that detainees are held before trial for months, even years, because they can't afford to post bail. The law, known as the Illinois Pretrial Fairness Act, also requires cops to be state licensed and to wear body cams by 2025, expanding officer training, making it easier to punish officers, and improving a victim's compensation program. A report released by independent investigators in Colorado concluded that police officers had no basis to stop, frisk, and detain black 23-year-old Elijah McClain after the police responded to calls of a suspicious person. McClain died after he had a mental health episode and paramedics were called, injecting him with ketamine, which caused McClain to suffer a heart attack and was declared brain dead shortly thereafter. McClain's family sued the Aurora, Colorado Police Department and its paramedics. Virginia is set to become the first state to abolish the death penalty. Governor Ralph Northam is set to sign the bill after the state legislature passed the measure. The newest ultimate punishment in the state is going to be life without parole, and Virginia was actually the state with the longest track record for death penalty punishments. Hours after U.S. gymnastics coach John Geddert was charged with human trafficking and criminal sexual conduct, he committed suicide at a rest area in Michigan. Geddert had ties to another member of the gymnastics team, Dr. Larry Nasser, who was convicted on child porn and sexual abuse charges. Specifically, Geddert was accused of molesting a girl under 16 as he was leading the women's gymnastics team in the 2012 Olympics. The U.S. deported one of the last known Nazi concentration camp guards, sending 95-year-old Friedrich Karl Berger to Germany after decades of living his life in Tennessee. Although Germany dropped charges against Berger last year, the police still want to question him. Investigators tied Berger to being a Nazi from an index card recovered off of a sunken ship. Berger admits he worked at a concentration camp, but that he was ordered to work there for a short time and didn't even carry a weapon. Golf star Tiger Woods was involved in a serious car accident on Tuesday where his car rolled over. Woods was seriously injured, needing surgery as soon as he was recovered from the crash. He recovered shortly afterward, and he reportedly wasn't aware of the extent of his injuries after he recovered. Officials said they're not charging Woods with any crime. Bloomberg staffers were unpleasantly surprised when they found out that the plush benefits they got as part of the former New York City mayor's presidential campaign counted as income under W-2s, skewing income brackets and leading to worse tax returns. And finally, everything is okay now that Lady Gaga got her dogs back. The pop star's dog walker was shot in the middle of the street 4 times in the chest, with the assailants stealing 2 out of the 3 French bulldogs that Lady Gaga owns. Lady Gaga had originally offered a $500,000 reward for the return of her 2 bulldogs, and a woman who is reportedly unrelated to the incident returned the 2 dogs to a police precinct this week. That's it for this week's show on the 25th Hour, helping you beat the 24/7 news cycle every Sunday afternoon. I ask that you please rate, subscribe, and share this podcast to your friends, and don't forget to become a patron today at patreon.com/25thhournews. As always, you can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com. Follow us on most of your social media platforms and spread New York City's soon-to-be top-rated political podcast.